Hey everybody, CVH here. Today is going to be another one of those videos where I just sit here and talk to you guys face to face, so to speak, through the internet. I really like doing these. I feel like I should do some more for the channel, and today's topic is going to be a fun one. My personal top 5 favorite cards from the recent Fall of the Dark Brotherhood expansion. So there's been a lot of talk about which cards people like. We've had a little bit of time now to play with the cards themselves. You might have seen a lot of the first impressions video I did on the channel right as the cards are being spoiled before we even had a chance to use them. Some of the cards I was right on, some of them I was farther from correct, and I really had fun doing those videos, but I'd like to revisit some of those cards with the knowledge we have now after playing with some of them in a lot of the top decks. Do bear in mind that I'm not going to be only considering power level when I'm talking about this list. This is going to be focusing on my favorite cards from a design standpoint. Obviously, I think these cards are powerful as well. That's one of the reasons I like them. You know, I like really good cards, obviously, like everybody. I do think if you were to make a list of cards that were in the conversation for some of the better cards in the expansion, all of these cards would make the cut. But for the sake of this list, I'm not going strictly in order of this is the best card I think, this is the second best card. Mostly, I'm going to be talking about my favorites, not necessarily the best cards in order. Without further ado, let's go to number 5. Falkreath Defiler. So this is a card that is very unique in Elder Scrolls Legends because we actually get to choose the creature we're getting back from the discard pile. This is one of the slay creatures I think is one of the more interesting, and as you could tell, I've had a lot of fun with this card already in the Reanimator Sorcerer deck, and it actually very much exceeded my expectations. Now, I don't think this is probably in the conversation for the most powerful card of the set or anything like that. I do think this card is pretty reasonable as far as things that can answer it. You know, a lot of things are going to be able to deal with this by the time it's going to be getting something back, but that's good because this effect is incredibly powerful, especially if you're comboing it with cards like Palace Conspirator to fill your graveyard or your discard pile, as I was in the Reanimator Sorcerer deck. Another place that we're seeing this card that came as a surprise to me is in the new Ramp Control Warrior decks, which are taking advantage of the effect not only through attacking, but also with cards like Unstoppable Rage and the Quicksilver Crossbow, which we see in the new expansion as well. So combined with those, you can easily get some pings or some sweepers and get a lot of Falkreath Defiler effects off. I remember one game that I was on the losing end of on the ladder, where my opponent played something around 9 or 11 belligerent giants in a single game, because unfortunately I wasn't apparently able to play around Falkreath Defiler plus Unstoppable Rage a couple times, and it cleared my board a couple times and got back a couple belligerent giants multiple times. And that was pretty insane to think that many belligerent giants could be played in a single game, to be completely honest. Insanely bad for me, of course. So besides that traumatizing experience, I do think this card is very interesting card design. I'm really excited to see where they move in the future as far as card design regarding the discard pile and the interactions that it can represent. I think one of the coolest aspects of this game compared to a game like Hearthstone is that we can look through our discard pile, look through our opponent's discard pile, and that just really opens up a whole new world of possibilities for card design. Moving on to Willpower for number 4 on my list is Knight of the Hour, a very simple card, 5-drop 3/3 with Prophecy Guard and Summon you gain 3 health. So I first saw this card when I was playing through the campaign, and it looked like a simple yet very powerful card, and that's pretty much where I'm putting it right now. Obviously, the Knight of the Hour itself is not going to be hitting for a bunch of damage. It doesn't really have this obscenely powerful effect, such as the Falkreath Defiler. When it goes off, it's pretty impressive. Knight of the Hour, a little less so, but the important thing is that we're getting some heals that aren't situational. We have some healing effects in the game right now for decks like Control Mage and Control Monk, but a few of them, have pretty serious stipulations. Obviously, Pillaging Tribune requires you to have something on the board already, and you have to attack with it, which can be pretty detrimental if you're planning on breaking runes. Dawnstar Healer doesn't even try to hide the fact that it wants you to have to break runes to heal, and literally makes you do so. There are other cards as well, like Healing Potion, that aren't situational at all, but they have been nerfed in the past, because it's clear that Bethesda and Direwolf want to make sure, healing isn't too powerful and it makes you have to do some things. Knight of the Hour sort of works around that by not healing you for too much. It's a modest 3 health that you're gaining, but coupled with the fact that it's a Prophecy Guard and doesn't really cost too much from your hand, this card has already seen a lot of play in decks like Control Mage and Control Monk, and I have to imagine that trend's going to continue in the future for whenever these decks just want an easy, not situational whatsoever heal that also has added utility against aggressive decks because of its Prophecy and Guard status. So I like this card quite a bit. I think it fulfills a role that we've sort of seen go a little bit unfulfilled in these control decks. We haven't really seen a lack of heal. People have made do with what's available, but I like that this card exists because it makes me not feel like I have to include additional situational healing cards. If the meta demands that I include more heal, I can, but simply putting 3 of these in a control deck seems like a solid base of defense against these aggro decks. It wouldn't be a top 5 list if I didn't mention Unstoppable Rage somewhere, and I think for a lot of you the biggest surprise may be that I'm not including it at number 1. Easily the most talked about card of the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood in the first couple weeks since the release. I have gotten some requests of people who wanted me to do a video talking about my opinion on this card potentially being overpowered, because I have mentioned a few times on stream that I don't really think it's overpowered. I'm not going to do so, not because I've changed my mind since I've said those things, but I thought I could just give a basic rundown here talking about this card and why it is one of my favorites in the expansion. So 7 cost, a friendly creature deals damage equal to its power to all other creatures in its lane, including yours and your opponents. Notably your opponents, that's really the benefit of the card. If you have a Night Shadow or something like that, that's a good example because it's one of the main targets for these controller ramp decks. Night Shadow with Breakthrough and Drain, you will be dealing the breakthrough damage every time it deals excess damage to one of your opponent's creatures, and you will be draining, much the same way as Odahviing getting Drain off a Mundstone will be giving you all of that based on how much damage you're dealing to your opponent's creatures. Unstoppable Rage can combo incredibly well with those keywords, as well as slay effects like the Falkreath Defiler that we talked about. Now, a lot of people think that's a flaw of the card design and it shouldn't really work that way with those keywords or the slay effects, and I think it actually adds a pretty interesting layer of, when you can play around with this card and when it's most important to play around the card. Unstoppable Rage obviously does some incredibly back-breaking things if you put yourself in a position to where your opponent has something like a Night Shadow or even just a Breakthrough out or a Child of Heresy. There are a lot of amazing targets for the card that may be a little slow by themselves, but if you're playing a deck with targets that are specifically there for the Unstoppable Rage, there's no question this card can do some of the most powerful plays you're going to see on the ladder. Now, the issue is when to play around the card. When it's done those crazy, powerful, completely just game-winning, back-breaking plays, most of the time that happened to me in the first few days of the expansion were when I played very, very poorly into the card. I saw my opponent play a Night Shadow, for example. I was still in the pre-Fall of the Dark Brotherhood mindset, and I said to myself, okay, well, I can just develop whatever threats I was developing that had less than 6 health in the Shadow lane, and I could just double trade into the Night Shadow the following turn. I was like, okay, this trade is pretty reasonable. I can set up for this. No real downside. If they get removed, then oh well, but I can set up for this trade. My opponent played Unstoppable Rage, which was totally on me to figure out because obviously my opponent was playing a control warrior deck going into turn 7 with a Night Shadow on the board, and I had the option to just let that lane be empty, develop my threats in the other lane, and continue the race. Instead, I chose to not play around Unstoppable Rage, and it just, completely destroyed my entire board, healed for something like 18 that turn. Now, that wasn't really a feel-good moment in the context of whether or not the game felt close or not, but after the game, I really had to take a step back and think about whether or not I was going to blame the card or blame myself, and I just came to the conclusion that I could have played that one much better. Now, is it always possible to play around? No, but it's not always going to be putting you in that situation where it is a card like a Night Shadow or a Child of Heresy that's insane like that. A lot of the time it's going to be less backbreaking, and if you allocate your resources appropriately, you can make it even less so. In the games since that game that I've really thought about playing around Unstoppable Rage, the effect simply hasn't been that insane. And the reason I'm putting it on this list after that long story about me getting wrecked is that I really enjoy it when there are cards that are made that are quite powerful, and you can make them less so by playing around them, and if you play poorly into them, you do get punished. A lot of people complain that games like Hearthstone are too luck-based, and we have to accept that they're going to make powerful cards that encourage you to play around them, and there are learning experiences. I even had a learning experience. This game isn't simple, it's not cut and dry. There are going to be new cards that are introduced that make you change the way you play the game. This is one of those cards. Obviously, the first learning experience a new player might have with the card probably isn't going to be the most fun game of Elder Scrolls Legends they'll ever play if they walk right into a Night Shadow into a lane of 4 and turn 7 on a control warrior matchup, but that's just part of the learning process, is losing sometimes, and Unstoppable Rage can put you into some pretty insane situations, but you do learn from them, and I think cards that force you to adapt and play around new things in the future, things that didn't previously exist in the card game. I think those are really good moving forward. Number 2 on the list is Astrid, the only legendary I'm including on this list, but not the only agility card. Number 2 and number 1 will both be agility, and I just have to get this out of the way before I talk about the card specifically. I think agility was the big winner of Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, and I think that's good. Agility, way in the past in open beta, had gone through a couple nerfs, and people were worried that it wasn't quite as strong as it once was, and I think it just got a lot of really solid creatures that really put it back into the meta, and Astrid's one of those. It was actually pretty tough. You'll notice with my number 1 pick, my number 1 pick is a little bit different from this, obviously, because the number 1 pick is going to be slower. That might be a spoiler for some of you, but it was kind of hard to limit it to only 2 agility cards in this top 5 list. If I were being honest about this list being strictly based on power level, I might have included Brotherhood Slayer or Sanctuary Pet, both of which incredibly solid cards that I've loved playing in a variety of decks since the set's release, but for the sake of this I included Astrid, not only because I think it's a solid card and it's cool to have a legendary on the list, but it kind of combines 2 of the effects of the Sanctuary Pet and the Brotherhood Slayer. You're getting a completed contract into your hand a lot of the time, much like the Brotherhood Slayer, and it does have lethal, much like the Sanctuary Pet. Obviously those 2 cards have added benefits like the Shackle effect and the Prophecy, but for the sake of Astrid, Astrid's just a really solid card by itself that gets a lot better when coupled with cards like Sanctuary Pet that have lethal, or Fighters Guild Recruit, another lethal that's, you know, been a part of the metagame for a while. But I really just enjoy Astrid as a standalone card. 3-drop 2/3 with lethal. It's not necessarily easy to remove, and it can trade 1-for-1 with relevant cards like Young Mammoth, which is very important because there are a lot of large 3-drops in the meta currently. Also trades favorably with the new Dark Guardian, which has seen a lot of hype as well, and whenever a friendly creature with lethal slays, you get a completed contract. Now these completed contracts have not disappointed. Everything from aggro decks to tempo decks to control decks to mid-range decks can make use of a free magicka in a turn. Imagine that. It's almost like resources are powerful. And even when you don't get the resources from Astrid, it is something that's going to make your opponent sort of go out of their way to play around most of the time. A lot of times this is going to have to eat a lightning bolt, and that's just totally fine with me, getting some premium removal out of my opponent, just so Astrid can't trade into something in the future. And of course, if you already have a lethal on board, whether or not you've played Fighters Guild on 2, or it's later in the game and you're set up for it, Astrid can give you a completed contract immediately, which is not really something the other ones that give you completed contracts can do. And it can just stay alive and give you more in the future. Overall, I really like agility in this expansion, I really like the cards that give you completed contracts, and I really like Astrid. Now, this might have been spoiled when I mentioned that the number 1 on the list would be a bit of a slower card, but we are going with Eclipse Baroness for my personal favorite card of the Dark Brotherhood so far. This could change in the future, but I love this card. I love playing these slow, grindy control decks, and this card fits perfectly in them. I haven't even gotten around to trying it too much in Ramscow yet, but so far I have enjoyed this card tremendously in the Value Assassin deck that I hit Legend with. I have a couple videos of that on the channel. I've enjoyed it tremendously in Control Monk, and Control Monk has seen a huge surge in popularity, at least at the Legend ranks, and I have to imagine that Eclipse Baroness is the big reason behind that. This card just oozes value in the late game. 8-drop 5/5 is already pretty reasonable, and Summon and Last Gasp, you're drawing a card and reducing its cost by 2. This thing is the Thieves Guild Recruit that you want to see in the late game, and Thieves Guild Recruit isn't really even that bad in the late game, but it's so obscenely good early game. That's how good Eclipse Baroness is in the late game, and if you're playing a deck that's going to be pushing the game to the late stages of the game more often than not, Eclipse Baroness is definitely where you want to be. So not only did these more aggressive decks take some big wins with Astrid, Brotherhood Slayer, and the Sanctuary Pet, but the Pet and the Eclipse Baroness specifically did some crazy good things for the late game decks using agility, to the point where Control Monk, not a deck that was really seen much at all last month, I think is going to be a major player now and moving forward. Even before I did a lot of testing to find out exactly how good this card is, the card advantage aspect of it, I just love these incredibly value-oriented cards in the late game. They really fit in with a lot of the styles of decks I like playing. You might see me play a lot of aggressive decks in videos and on streams, but a part of me will always be that control player. Those were the first decks I fell in love with in a lot of different card games, and Eclipse Baroness makes me really excited. It might not necessarily mean agility control decks are the best control decks at any given point, but the fact that they can now compete on the same level as some of the others, I really enjoy Baroness for that reason. So that's my top 5 favorite cards from the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood expansion as it stands. As always, if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'm really curious to hear, after we've had a little bit of time to playtest with these cards, if you have a favorite, Comment it down below. Let me know why you think it's so great. Let me know if your list differs from mine. Let me know what you've been playing with. Let me know what you'd like to see on the channel. As always, feel free to subscribe for more strategy content, deck techs, videos like these. Got a lot of good stuff planned, so feel free to hit that subscribe button. Follow the stream link. I stream this game daily, so you can check that out in the description, and I'll see you guys next time.